Hello and welcome to Console Shock, episode 44, Retro and Modern Gaming Chat with me, Trev and Stu.
Hey guys.
How's it going?
Yeah, we've got a show lined up for you today.
It's a big one, isn't it? One of our favourite YouTubers.
One of my favourite YouTubers. He's up there with LGR, the 8-bit guy,
Console Shock.
Console Shock, yeah.
Stuart,
all the big guns.
Well, we've had a bit of a run, haven't we? We had a great one last time around. We had the Dreamcast, which was our focus, which
yes.
Good timing as well, because it was a 20th anniversary. So we feel remarkably old now, don't we? Because it's a retro console, but it's not, in our eyes, it doesn't feel old, does it?
No.
The games are largely what we have now, aren't they? Just lower resolution, really, when you think about it, right?
Polygons.
Bigger polygons, yeah. So we're probably going to dive back a bit further now. So we have an amazing guest on this time around. We have Retro Man Cave on, and it's Neil. So thank you for coming on, Neil.
Hello, cave dwellers.
Hey.
Thanks so much for having me. That was a lovely intro. Thanks, guys.
No problem. Thank you for coming on. So we're big fans of your channel, and we're kind of in awe of the fact that you somehow have an entire, I assume, area of your house that you can just dedicate to chucking a bunch of retro gaming junk in. So how does the missus feel about that?
It's not actually part of the house.
Okay.
Yeah, the channel started off, so if you watch some of the earlier videos, that is in my house. And that's the spare room of a 2-bed flat. So
right.
50% of the bedrooms was dedicated to YouTube. And as it grew, I just had stuff bursting out of cupboards. There just wasn't room for everything. So as it happens, my main daily job is self-employed, and I needed a space to do that. So I just put the two together and found a space where I could do both. So the space that you see, half of it is Retro Man Cave, half of it is my other job, and I can just walk back and forth between the two. So it's a marriage of convenience. And yes, Mrs. Retro Man Cave is very happy that all of that stuff is out of the flat now.
Is that quite difficult when you've got sort of all your old retro games and gaming systems on one side of the office, and then on the other side of the office, you've got to do some sort of report or something?
Yeah, it's a huge distraction.
I can imagine it is, yeah.
They don't stay on one side of the office. They're everywhere. Yeah, it's a huge distraction. If I've got all the studio lighting on, I'm just itching to get over there and make videos. But got to pay the bills first.
Exactly.
And then I can go and make the videos as a reward. Yeah.
You're doing a bit of work and you have a cheeky glance at your lovely Amiga 1200 with its WHDload just begging you to play for 6 hours non-stop.
Yeah.
But you pull yourself away from that. That's admirable. So obviously you've got this big sort of collection of retro stuff. Was that always a goal? I want to get everything. Was it like a thing where I think me and Stu, in terms of our collecting, it's kind of come from an area of, these are things that we wanted when we were kids. We would read about them in, your magazines, or maybe we'd have a local import shop and be like, God, I would love to have that. But as kids, obviously, we didn't have the means to do that. Is that the sort of where you're coming from with, or is it just, I just want to get everything in, and it's stuff that I'm not even familiar with. I want to check it out. What is the sort of motivation?
Yeah, it's more a case of wanting to meet computers that I didn't have first time around, or I didn't have access to. Yeah. Obviously, I want to collect the ones that I had before, just because of that nostalgia. Like the Amstrad CPC, that was my first computer, so I was really happy to get hold of a 464. And of course the Amiga. Yeah. But then there are things like the Vectrex, which I'd never seen before. There are things like the Dragon 32 and the VIC 20, which were a bit before my time. It's lovely to be able to get hold of them and just find out what they're all about, really, and how they compare to other systems that I had. So there's no rhyme or reason to the way I collect. And a lot of the things that I have are actually donations from viewers. So
that's amazing.
What comes in. It is amazing. They're incredibly generous, and I work with what I've got. So what you see on the channel is this strange mix of whatever's in my head that week and whatever I actually have access to on the shelves to put two and two together and try and make something entertaining. And sometimes it comes together. For example, I did an episode on Soviet Sinclair ZX Spectrum clones.
Yeah,
that was good.
And that just came about because somebody sent me this beaten up old Soviet clone. And as soon as I scratched the surface on what that was, just more and more and more came out about this whole subculture in the former Soviet Union of Spectrum clones. So yeah, there's no reason behind my collecting, and it's really the second coming of my collection, because I did collect before I did the channel many years back, and when things were a lot cheaper to buy on eBay. Back then I was buying brand, sealed in box CDTVs, PC Engines, Amstrad GX 4000s, all of these computers that were in mint condition. I had an Atari ST that was still sealed and never used.
That's a good thing.
yeah. As an Amiga lover, that was exactly how they should be.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, never taken out to sully my TV.
So I had this really sort of mint collection of computers first time around, and through other reasons, I had to sell that collection off.
So what? How would that work out? So I guess like a sealed Atari ST, I guess that was like shop stock that never got sold, or was that how?
That particular one I'd found on eBay. I probably paid about £100 for it at the time.
Cool.
And I sold it to a museum in the end. I think it was a museum in like Sweden or somewhere like that.
Oh, wow.
But I sold off all of this collection, and I went and lived and worked in France for a while. And then when I came back, I got the itch again to collect. And I started buying broken computers. And I immediately got much more satisfaction out of getting a beaten up old computer and bringing it back to life and making it look like new for a lot less money. Granted, I had to invest a lot more time into doing that than going off and spending £500 on a sealed in box Amiga 1200 on eBay. It was just more satisfying. So the second collection, which I have now, has grown out of that satisfaction, I think. And I think I get a lot more from it for that reason.
I guess you understand the machines more, don't you? When you go in there and you analyze, this chip's not working, or there's problems with this, and it almost sort of tells a story of how the computer was made.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Every computer has a story. Some of those stories are not so good. You can immediately tell when one comes in that's been in somebody's garden shed for 20 years, for example, as you look at the screws on the outside and see a layer of rust on them and think, oh, this is not going to be good on the inside. Others a little better. So yeah, that's a nice way of putting it.
It's funny actually, because I'm sat here right now. I do have an Atari 1040 STE, the family curriculum pack, which is the dullest of all the packs that probably came out. But it is kind of, I like the halfway thing of not necessarily sealed or anything, but I've got the box and everything in good nick. But I still like to sort of, pop it out of the box and, delicately sort of set it up. And on that one, I think I've played like Final Fight, the sort of kind of really terrible Atari ST version that's still kind of okay to play. Yeah, extremely jerky compared to like every other version that ever came out, basically.
Yeah. The Amiga gets a bad rap for its Final Fight conversion, but I actually really liked it. Yeah, I think it's not bad at all. I was quite impressed at the time.
Yeah, I still play it now. I mean, for starters, it's got all three characters in it, which the Super Nintendo version can't say.
Yeah, it was missing Guy, wasn't it, on the SNES?
It was, yeah, and then they did that bizarre thing where they released a separate version of Final Fight that had Guy in it, but still only two characters. Weird. But actually the Atari ST version isn't too bad either. It's nearly identical. It's just a few less colours, and it's just got jerky scrolling, which is the Atari ST Amiga conversion in a nutshell, I think, right there. Yeah. But actually, talking of that, you had I think you had a video recently. We had a couple of sort of guests on, and one of them had an Atari Falcon, which is the holy grail for me. Were you tempted to not allow him to leave the man cave with that?
that was Gary who had he bought a Falcon and a Jaguar with him, and we did a 3-hour live stream. In fact, that was my first live stream that I did. So yeah, we used the Falcon, and a lot of people were interested in seeing that in action. Yeah. Unfortunately, there wasn't a great deal that we could use to show it in action because there weren't really any exclusives. Yeah. There were some demos that showed off the power a little bit, but I think there was a lot more under the hood than we were able to show on the Falcon. It was an impressive machine on paper, but we went back to playing some Jaguar games.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, that's the thing, because that's something that if I saw one cheap on eBay, although you're never going to see one cheap on eBay, but if I like cheap for one of them is like 300 quid, I guess, or something, which is
I saw one just today for £800 on eBay. So.
Yeah, in a probably battered, and but the thing is, if I got one, I'll just stick my discs in that are from like that are just 520 and 1040 discs. Probably not even for the E models, just the plain old regular ST games. So I'm like, why did I spend all this money on this? Specs wise, very impressive. Probably outdoes an Amiga 1200, I would say.
I'd say so.
Yeah, with an 030 in there. But yeah, there's just nothing that takes. I'll probably try Frontier Elite 2, which is like my second favorite Amiga game, which you would get a boost because the Atari ST version is good. It's actually quite good already, but you'd get a nice boost in that. But I don't think I would get any other benefit. I think it's probably really for like, if you're making music, I think you've got some extra. The hardware will help you with that, and if you use Calamus, I think that's like the desktop publishing software. That would run a bit quicker, I think. But in terms of it's not really something you could do anything with, is it? Really?
That's right. Days? Yeah, you're right. It's got there's quite a high-end DSP chip in there.
Yeah,
the same one that you had in the next station.
Yes,
later next station, which was a $5,000 computer. So it's got some high-end components in there. But yeah, you need a specific purpose for it, I think, to get the most out of it.
You almost wanted Commodore to take those specs and shove them in the Amiga 1200 originally, right? Because that was a tad underpowered when it came out for the time frame it came out.
But we covered a computer recently, and we had a live stream on the channel, which was the Sharp X68000.
Oh god, yeah, an amazing machine.
And in many ways, that's kind of like the Japanese Amiga. The way it is, it's got the 68000 CPU. It's running at about 10 megahertz. It's got the similar kind of arrangement of custom chips as the Amiga has, for hardware sprites and things, but it's just up that extra level, and it came out in 1987.
Exactly,
Yeah, and then that system was used as the basis for the CPS-1 arcades. So you get these arcade perfect conversions, like Final Fight, which is perfect in every way, except it can't put quite as many sprites on the screen as the arcade. They upped it on the arcade. But it looks incredible. Street Fighter 2 looks incredible on 1987 hardware. So, yeah, if Commodore had got their hands on that, or even if Sharp had sold it outside of Japan, then we could have had, a slightly different upbringing with our machines, I think.
Well, when you think about that sort of 68020 chip that is in the Amiga 1200, I mean, that basically debuted in the Macintosh 2, which came out in 1987.
Yeah,
it was expensive as hell, the Macintosh 2, but it had absolutely stunning specs. I mean, it could display 16 million colors. You had to get a whacking great big graphics card that would go in there. It wasn't a default thing. But that's just in 1987. We were still playing Master System and Amiga, which had, obviously the Amiga then was still fairly fresh. And look at these amazing 32 colors on the screen at once. And the Macintosh 2, which is like, 4, 5, 6 grand probably, could do it could absolutely destroy that. But yeah, I mean, that CPU that became what was the heart of the A1200 really was released in 1987 in a sort of retail form. Although I think it was actually made in like 1982 or 83 or something like that originally. Just that then it would have cost a lot, and nothing could really use it in those days. But it's amazing how long chips took to filter down to a cheap price. I mean, the Amiga 1200 wasn't cheap when it came out. It was 400 quid. Far cheaper than a 486 meh PC would be over $1,000, wouldn't it, in those days? But yeah, the Sharp X6800, I mean, dear Lord, it's expensive if you find one. I mean, was that an eBay thing, or?
Once again, that belonged to the same Gary who has the Falcon.
That guy,
quite the collector. Yeah,
it's like your worst nightmare with all these things. Yeah.
Gary's great. He brings all these things to the cave for the live stream, and the next live stream we're doing at the end of this month, actually, he's coming to be a part of it because people like to see him on there. But he doesn't have to bring anything this time, so he can come and relax and enjoy it.
He's worried you'll steal it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, going back to what you were saying about hardware trickling down, the 68,000 was $3,000 in 1987. So you were paying a premium for that power, just like you were for the Macs, you know. So yeah, it's the first computer that's really made me look at the Amiga. I had the 500 and just think, oh, okay, there is something that really challenged it in that sort of multi-purpose computer and gaming platform, because the Amiga 500 did become very much a gaming platform in that arena.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
You know, the Amiga 500 has always been the king for me in that period, but yeah, that sort of wobbled the throne a little bit, I think.
Well, I think the 500 is that sweet spot. It's got the affordability, and it can do everything that kind of was needed for it to do in that era. I mean, but sort of talking about the like the Falcon again, where it's got great specs as a collector. It's got great specs. Was one of those dream computers when you were a kid and all that stuff. But you can't really do anything with it now if you got one. There was even less you could do with it then when it was actually relevant and sort of a commercial platform. But the X6800 there, you mean you could have lots of fun now playing all the Konami ports and the Castlevania that was on it, Street Fighter and Final Fight. You could happily have that set up in your gaming room and have a ton of stuff you could do with it.
You can, and just like WHDload on the Amiga, you can put your SD SCSI adapter in the shop.
Yeah.
Just have a memory card full of games and you're away. Yeah. But what the Amiga also had, sorry, I'm slipping into Amiga talk here.
No, that's fine.
That's okay.
We're leading the Amiga slippage. Don't worry.
Yeah, for me as well, the Amiga 500, it was that period where a computer was still almost console-like in that you didn't need to think about upgrading it. Obviously, there were upgrades available, but I was a young teenager at the time. It didn't occur to me that I might want to put a CPU upgrade in an Amiga 500. It did everything I needed it to do. And when you move into that period, you're thinking, oh, what's the next graphics card I'm going to get? What's the next sound card I need to get? It was bliss not having to worry about that.
Yeah, I mean, like I used to play that. Yeah, I already mentioned it, but Frontier Elite 2, that ran like absolute toilet on an Amiga 500, but it was good enough for me.
It wasn't great at the time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't YouTube for me to go and watch someone running it on a 50 megahertz 040, and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? You know, it was like, now I can do that, but thankfully being an adult, physically, maybe not mentally, I can now. And well, also you've got things like individual computers, like Stu. We had the episode, a couple of episodes where we talked about upgrading an Amiga 1200 in modern times, which turns out being one of our more popular episodes. A lot of people have said to me in Amiga groups, like, "Oh, I didn't know any of this stuff. I thought I've had my Amiga 1200 for years, but I thought I had to get 90s worn out." Blizzard accelerators. And I'm like, no, there's these people like individual computers that make modern accelerators with modern parts that are smaller than the original ones and have better specs.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
I've got an episode coming out next week. It's showing to my patrons at the moment, which is an Amiga 1500 Trash to Treasure. It's the same 1500 that was on an episode recently where I talked about its backstory. But actually, in that video, it wasn't much more than a prop because it was broken. So
fascinating Amiga,
yeah, really cool story.
So that was the Checkmate. You did the Checkmate one, and I was never aware of that.
Yeah. So that was the Checkmate story, which featured Stephen Jones.
Yep.
And the story continues because he's bringing out his Amiga. Well, it's not Amiga branded, but his 1500 case for modern PCs, and that you can transplant Amiga 500s and 1200s and whatnot into. In fact, his Kickstarter is live now, just until the end of this month. So he's just trying to hit his target to get that case released. And there's this fascinating story then from the present day, all the way back to this battle that Checkmate had with Commodore. And you mentioned it in your previous show or the one before, the story of how they're ripping the guts out of Amiga 500s.
Yes.
Into these custom-made Checkmate cases.
Yeah.
You can't tell from the pictures, they weigh a ton. These things are great bits of metal, but they're great at what they do. And Commodore took a dislike to it and really, really screwed them.
And made like an official 1500, which
made an official 1500. which is just the 2000 with another sticker on and no hard drive controller, which some of the 2000s came with. You just got dual floppy drives. That's what I've got. I think some of them came out of the factory in different ways. Some days I think it was just whatever they had on the shop floor came out the door. But that's what I've got. And so we get it working in next week. And then coming back to these modern accelerators, the question I ask at the end of the video is, what shall I do with it? I've got this big box Amiga that's essentially nothing more than an Amiga 500 in there. But you've got the space to upgrade it. You've got the additional CPU upgrade slot. You've got a video slot to put a flicker fixer.
Oh, God, put every bloody thing you can in it.
Exactly. Where do I go next? And these modern accelerators are, well, they're probably top of the list rather than finding an old Blizzard that might, fall over and cost me a fortune to get hold of. There's that. There's obviously the Vampire option. Where do I go? So I'm just trying to figure that out.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because, say, if you listen to that Amiga episode, we actually had an interesting sort of point that me and Stu debated where what is the limit of upgrading an Amiga to the point where is it even an Amiga anymore? Like with a Vampire in there, why not just, empty the guts of the Amiga case and stick a Raspberry Pi in it, and is that even and run an emulator? Is that even an Amiga anymore? Hell, I can play Amiga games on my modded Xbox and they run better than they do, on a CD32 or... So, I mean, my personal feeling is I've got an Amiga 1200 with an 040 in it, and that's it, really. I'm quite happy with that. I just want to play classic Amiga games. I'm not too interested in making my Amiga into a kind of a weird late 90s PC, so I can run kind of Quake at a relatively low frame rate, but cool, I'm running it on an Amiga 600 or something. So I'm not quite so as enthusiastic about Vampires and things like that. Very cool that you can whack like those things into like HDMI directly with the various things you can do with the Vampire. It's almost like why stop with Amigas? Like make put a bunch of stuff in a NES, so it could play Super Nintendo games and then 64 games. Technically, there's no reason why you couldn't put a Vampire in Amiga and they could allow it for you to put other cores on there, and then your Amiga could be an Atari, your Amiga could be a Super Nintendo, whatever core they put in there. So, yeah, it's difficult. Obviously, the spirit of a system is something that's completely intangible and a large part of it, and having that connection, particularly with the Amiga, back to your original memories and the nostalgia of it. So there are different ways that you can look at it. You could say, well, the Vampire is completely in the spirit and it's possibly moving the Amiga forward. It's giving it the power for future developments on more powerful operating systems, the Amiga OS 4, whoever owns the rights to make the Amiga OS now, I don't know. But I don't need that, and I don't want that. I just want to go back to playing those games that I used to play. And it sounds, I know 40 sounds good. If you've got the extra RAM, then you've got the overhead needed to use WHDload and things like that. If you've got an 040, then you can see what it would be like to play Jeff Crammon's Formula One at a higher frame rate, or Damocles, or Elite 2, and you can go, if I had £1,000 back in the day, this is what it would have been like. This is so cool. But when you go way beyond that, you almost sever that connection, and you're going into something new. And you can enjoy that, but it's new. It's not the nostalgic experience, is it, of the old Amiga looking back at. So. I want to have the ultimate original Amiga experience that you could get, with that 90s kind of technology or equivalents of that with the individual computers, guys. Just to play the old stuff. I don't want to try and make my Amiga something I can do. I don't want. It's never going to be a daily driver. I don't want to try and go on the internet on it and play MP3s and videos and everything. It's not. I don't want it for any of that stuff. I'll use my MacBook for that.
An interesting one I've got. Sorry to interrupt you. An interesting one I've got at the moment is I've got a case for a Acorn Phoebe, and the Acorn Phoebe was a system that came after the RISC. What are they called now?
RISC OS.
RISC OS Archimedes Acorn system, sorry. And it was supposed to be the successor to that, but it was never released. But the cases were. So I've got this tower case, which is Acorn branded. It's got this bright yellow plastic frontage. Looks like
lovely.
No other color that you've seen on a system before.
Yeah.
It's not because it needs retro brighting. It is genuinely bright yellow.
That's cool.
But there's no guts to it because they never released the system. So, I've got this dilemma of, what do I put in there? I can invent what this machine would have been. And
Raspberry Pi.
that's the closest relative, isn't it? Modern day relative would be the Raspberry Pi.
How did you get that case?
That was eBay.
Really?
There's quite a lot of them around. I don't know why so many cases made it out into the wild, but they did. So yeah, I'm thinking Raspberry Pi with the ARM processor. There is a version of Riscos that runs on it. But I do want to get those rear ports on the case populated. Maybe I can break out some, I don't know, some serial ports or some HDMI ports that will sit nicely in the back and hook up a floppy disk drive and a CD drive. I need to look into it. But yeah, that's quite a nice blank slate to work with, is just having this case with a system that was never released. I'm looking forward to that one.
It is a platform that I've kind of flirted with, the Archimedes, because I keep seeing them. I want to get, it's always in the back of my mind to get an A3000, which is sort of the Amiga 500 lookalike Archimedes. It just looks cool. I mean, it's a bit chunkier, though. I think it has a bit more height. It's actually closer into an Atari ST, actually, in terms of the look. I think it might even be a shade bigger. But yeah, they're kind of weird because they've got no joystick ports. Even though there are ways around that, but there's a lot of Amiga games on the Acorn, and they're largely identical. You can get cannon fodder at a cannon fodder port. You've got Sensible Soccer. Obviously, you've got the other games like that were ported to the Amiga, like Zark, which is kind of the famous one because it was a good demonstration of the Archimedes power, which is a lot more powerful than an Amiga actually at the time. And there's a lot of A3000s pop up on eBay because that was kind of the workhorse prior school used. They're often completely yellow and battered to hell.
Yeah, they often have the name of the school stamped on the top, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yeah, and the BBC microcomputer sort of badge is always bright yellow from just just like losing its color from the UV exposure. But yeah, I'm after one of them because that would be something that I could actually play around with. You have to make sure you get the mouse with them though, because they have a very odd mouse port. You can't just jack in like an Amiga mouse or an ST mouse. It's got its own dedicated mouse. The one that often people always say, oh, the one you should really get is it the 3010, which is the one with the green. Yeah, it had the green keys, and they made like a sort of a retail version of it for people just to use in their home to sort of capitalize on them. Oh, Dad, this is the one I use at school. You should get me one for here as well, so I can do my homework and play Sensible Soccer and Gods.
Yeah, I've got good memories of the Archimedes. Obviously, we had them at school after the BBCs.
Yes,
and like you say, they came with Zarch on there, or Conqueror was the other one, the army tank.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
it was the same engine, but that was great fun. So you got a glimpse using them at school of what they were capable of before the teacher told you to close that and get back to word processing or whatever. Yeah. But I had a friend on my estate, so like you probably on my estate, you knew who your friends were by what computer they had. So
that's right.
Mike had the Spectrum, Adam had the Master System, and a little later, my friend Darren had an Archimedes. He was the only person I knew who had an Archimedes at home because it was fairly unusual to go.
Yeah, I only knew one other person. Yeah.
And we used to play some great games that, like you said, used the power of that RISC chip and things like E-Type Jag and Chocks Away. And was it Starglider was on there as well?
That's right. That got ported to I think it had a sequel, didn't it? Starglider 3000 on the Saturn and the PS1. Yeah. Original was on the Archie.
Yeah, it was a really powerful machine. It did deserve a little bit more recognition, but it was really tied up in that educational market, wasn't it? Where it did well, but I don't think Acorn had any designs on trying to make a fully, retail commercial product to take on the Commodore, really. I don't get that impression. I could be wrong, but I thought they would have just made the 3000 readily available, I guess, if that was their intention. Yeah. And let's face it, Commodore didn't really know what they were doing anyway, so it'd be impossible to second guess them.
Yeah, all these companies, though, just haphazardly just flung out these computers with very poor, but it seems almost by accident things got popular in those days, wasn't it? As opposed to any real savviness.
Throw it out and see what sticks. Let's put an Amiga 500 in a black stack system case. Hold it CDTV 8 years after, you know, the technology was current, and see what happens.
Yeah, and you know, the whole to start off with, let's make a games console. Oh, no one wants games consoles now. Let's make it into a computer, but we still kind of want it to be a games console. Let's give it to Atari. Oh no, let's get Commodore to buy it. Okay, Commodore have got it. It's a computer. It's a serious computer, but it has nice graphical stuff that's all frivolous. Okay, people are making games on it. Okay, it's kind of a games console, but we still want you to think of it as a computer. And like, you know, it's just a funny like history when you look back on it.
It is.
And it's annoying because like, we've talked about it before. Like, there's a lot of really cool documentaries being made about it, but they're all Americans that make them. So they all talk about the Amiga as being this little niche thing that, you know, only a cool select group of people knew about. We need some European. Okay, we're doing it. All right, us three. Let's make the definitive European-focused Amiga documentary where it's not a niche, weird thing that only a handful of people
everyone
knew.
had.
Everyone bloody had one because it was the mainstream thing.
Yeah, they talk about it as if it was just this platform for the video toaster, because that's what they used it for over there.
Exactly.
And then the documentaries always have this period where they talk about the great video game crash, and it was all doom and gloom.
Oh, the crash!
And you're sat here going, well, we had our ZX Spectrums, and we had hundreds of games down at WH Smith's or Woolies or wherever we went. There wasn't a crash. What are you talking about?
What annoys me when you get all these American, everyone gets interviewed and they always go, oh, you know, the first computer I had was an Apple II. And I never knew anyone with an Apple. I didn't know what an Apple II was.
Yeah, they're out in the UK. We touched upon it before, actually, because I've got two Apple IIs. I've got a GS, and which is awesome, by the way, and I've got an actual original. Well, we didn't get the original Apple II in the UK. We got the Euro Plus, which is an Apple II Plus, which is a slightly upgraded Apple II that came out about a year after the first one. It's just turning into an Apple II podcast now. We got they sort of converted that to PAL and called it the Euro Plus, but it's only black and white. Because the trick that Steve Wozniak used to get color from the Apple II doesn't work on a PAL signal. We have to get an additional card to get color, which is a bit annoying. But yeah, we got the Euro Plus, but it was mega expensive. It was, you know, $4 or $5 grand in like, this is like, you know, in 1979 when, you know, we had like the ZX80 and like, you know, the ZX81 and these things were like a couple £100. It had absolutely no chance of obviously people bought them because they get them on eBay. They're not rare as such, so some people bought them. But yeah, I mean, I never. It wasn't until I think I watched Triumph of the Nerds, that sort of mid-90s documentary, that it was just Apple II, and I was like, oh, that's where computers started. Wow, cool. I didn't know that.
It's interesting that comes up a lot. The Apple II, obviously, it did sell a huge amount. And it was part of those first 3 home computers that came out. So you had the TRS-80, the Apple II, and the Commodore PET. But the TRS-80 actually outsold them both. So
that's right. Yeah,
you'd think there would be more people would be talking about the TRS-80, you know, the Model 1. But actually, it's always the Apple II that comes up. Interesting.
I like the fact that you came out in your first episode of Trash to Treasure on that, and you were saying that they wanted to make 3,600 of them or something because that's how many stores they had.
That's right. So the fallback plan was, you know, the management went, well, this isn't ever going to work. So when it fails, we'll just put one in each store to manage the stock, and that will be their purpose. So that's why they made the number of machines they did. But obviously, it was a very different story when the orders started coming in.
I think it's because the Apple II story is very romantic. You know, it's 2 dudes making a computer in a garage that end up, and the company's still going. You know, the iPhones that we use and everything all are descendants of the Apple 1 and the Apple II, which is the first, mainstream Apple computer. And you could still do stuff with them. You know, there's tons of games. Obviously, we're fairly oblivious to all this because we didn't really have them in the UK. Well, we had them, but we didn't. You know, there wasn't a mainstream thing. I've got a few issues of a magazine called Windfall, which is a UK Apple computer magazine. And yeah, it was a very niche group of people that bought this magazine and very dedicated, almost like the Amiga, really, weirdly. Yeah, and it was a very dedicated businesses and schools that loved the Apple product. It was several years into, well, I think it was well into the like 1980 or 81 that they got a European branch of Apple, because obviously it was an afterthought. Once they'd saturated the US, they were like, well, is there other people that might buy this stuff? But yeah, it never had a chance against the 8-bit micros we had here. But if you look back on it, I mean, I play some games on mine. I've got Elite. They got a port of Elite. That's quite good, because it's obviously a 6502 in the Apple II, which the BBC Micro had, and the NES, funnily enough. Obviously, the 6502, I think that was the first thing it was used in that was in terms of a commercial product, because it's older than the BBC Micro, the Apple II. It's got a ton of, even like I played like RoboCop on it, as in most people think of the Spectrum game.
Yeah. Does it have the cool music as well?
No, it's crap. The Apple II can't do scrolling. So it's a flip screen thing, but it's the same. You're like RoboCop. It's not scrolling, but you're walking across shooting criminals out of windows and stuff.
Yeah,
and it's in color and everything, but it's just. But you can get, if you look up on YouTube, there are people made sound cards for it and graphics cards that you can plug into the original Apple II. You can get some amazing, like sort of Super Nintendo quality and Amiga sound. Some games would utilize these amazing. They're called the Mockingbird, I believe it's called. And there's graphics cards that can add more colors. You can plug mice into it. It got upgraded to hell.
Yeah. This is the thing with a lot of those old computers. The expansion interfaces of them really did just wire directly into the CPU. And you could take control. That's why things like the Vampire are possible. And on the BBC recently, on the BBC Micro, it has these tube interfaces underneath the BBC Micro where you can plug in expansion cards.
Right, yeah.
Somebody made a Raspberry Pi expansion card, so you plug that into the bottom of the BBC Micro.
That's crazy, yeah.
And it acts as a second CPU. So you've got you've got a gigahertz CPU wired into your BBC Micro. So then you play Elite. You can run Elite using a gigahertz CPU from the Pi on the BBC.
How would that work? I guess there's obviously a frame rate cap, I guess, on it. Or do they think, would you put that stuff into a game that in Elite? Probably not, right?
I don't know, because it's a problem you have on a lot of earlier games. Things like the Ultima games, if you play them on a PC that's over, say, an SX30, 486 SX33, it just runs too fast because there's no cap on it. And then you have to start using memory resident programs like MoSlow and things like that to hammer the processor and artificially slow it down. Caps are a problem in those situations.
It works in positive ways in some respects, because the SD to SNES flash cart for the Super Nintendo, which can now run Super FX games. Red Guy, a single coder, he actually managed to get Super FX games running. But a great feature he added to the SD to SNES cart is you can run the Super FX chip at twice the speed. So Doom, which was nigh on unplayable on the Super Nintendo, it's now actually kind of good, because you can put it in fast mode and it runs a decent frame rate now.
How does that work on Star Fox? Is that nice?
Well, the game runs faster. Literally everything is faster, but not in a bad way. It actually feels more responsive. I think the music's the same. And the sound effects, but the game does run faster. But it's not like sort of like Benny Hill, like kind of speed. It makes it actually more responsive and more playable. So it makes sense just to have that feature permanently on. But yeah, it's a great thing. And also, it's actually got SA1 games running literally in the last month. Nice. Yeah, so a lot of games use that SA1 chip. Super Mario RPG is a big one that now works on an SD to SNES flash cart. So yeah, that sort of, it's amazing how modern stuff can actually makes old stuff work better.
There's that side of it, and there's also the convenience side of it when you start looking at things like Gotex, SD card readers. Because just the other day when I was fixing up this Amiga 1500, for the end of the video, I wanted to show some games running on it naturally. And it was the fourth game that I pulled off the shelf. that actually worked. The floppies on the other three were just had it. They were just unreadable. So yeah. So these things, they make it a lot more convenient to be able to play all these old games for sure. Yeah.
It's annoying with the Atari ST actually because there's no real WHDload thing for that. There's a thing called an Ultra Satan, which is like a hard drive emulator. Because hard drives were prevalent on the ST as well. You sort of jack it into the hard drive interface or the external disk interface, and there's sort of a handful of games which have been kind of modded to run off that. But your only real option is the a GoTech that you pop into the side, or it replaces the disk drive. I need to do that. I've got 3 Atari STs. My good one. I'm going to take out the floppy disk drive and stick one of them in. It's not quite as good as functionality wise. I don't find it quite as good as WHDload.
Well, you still have the speed of a floppy, so it emulates the speed, so you're not getting any speed advantage out of it.
Yeah, you might have to flip discs as well, don't you, and stuff, which, you know.
Yeah. But I don't know if you saw recently that somebody released a Pi hat, a Raspberry Pi hat, which was gave you a cycle perfect emulation of a Commodore 1541 drive. So you could plug that into your Commodore 64 and just put your games on your Raspberry Pi storage and load from that. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see a few more uses of the Raspberry Pi for things like the Atari ST, you know, other ways of interfacing that with other systems to get you a cheap storage solution. I think that project's proven that it's possible for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really good Atari forum. There's a UK-based sort of Atari ST forum, and a lot of the discussion of how to sort of, you know, boost. I mean, there's a lot of interesting chats about accelerators because it wasn't really a thing for the Atari ST to, again, it's like if people like us who initially came from the Amiga, the Atari ST is like a bizarro world where everything's kind of the same, but not quite. So as someone now that's, you know, as an adult, well, I mean, exploring other platforms, the Atari ST was always something I'd see in the adverts in Amiga Shopper as the other computers that Silica sold in their wonderful big 2-page adverts of what their shop sold. And I'm always curious, it'd be cool to own one just to have something like to play the other versions of games. So now we're actually, you know, we could go on eBay, we can grab one for cheap and play them. But yeah, some things doesn't quite translate. Like I said, there wasn't really accelerators, but people have found ways to sort of solder in slightly better 68K CPUs because they had different clock speeds as well, which is it's 8 megahertz is the base ST speed, which is a shade faster than the Amiga. We can actually compare. Again, I keep talking about Frontier Elite 2, but Frontier Elite 2 is literally about 1 frame a second better on the Atari ST because of that, you know, difference in CPU
it's
speed.
like the old Spectrum C64 argument. The Spectrum could do, you know, pure 3D just a little bit quicker because of its CPU, and that was the one up that the Spectrum owners had on the Commodore 64 with all of its sprite hardware and whatnot.
Yeah.
Say, well, Elite runs quicker on mine and at a slightly higher resolution as well. So
yeah, you got the slightly less blockiness, didn't you? But the cost of, you know, everything was yellow almost a lot of the time. Yeah. But some of the arcade ports I think were better on the Spectrum as well, like Contra or Grisor, as it was called there, and Midnight Resistance is another one. Yeah. That was way better.
That was a Jim Bagley effort, wasn't it? Midnight Resistance, I think.
It was, just on its own, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. Pretty much most of the things he touched were great. Some great games on the Spectrum. My favorite game on the Spectrum was Last Ninja 2, even though it was in black and white and all of the other systems had color. I just felt that it worked in black and white. The atmosphere was really good on the Spectrum. So that's one of my personal favorites. A bit clunky to play now. The controls, you know, are a bit tank-like, but it was a good game.
Yeah, they haven't aged well, have they, though, the isometric sort of last Ninja games. I think, obviously, that was when, like, the differences between systems was extremely stark. I mean, when you go to, like, the next generation, Atari ST and Amiga, it was, I think the main difference was often they would, the game would play in a smaller window on the Atari ST and the scrolling would be jerkier and the sound was crap. Saying that, if it was a menu or a title screen, they would pretty much, the sound would be the same because you could dedicate the CPU of the ST to play a sample, to play sample music. But during the game, obviously, it couldn't do that. So you had to use like the basically it was a ZX Spectrum sound chip, wasn't it? The 128 or a variation of it. Very close to it.
The AY chip, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and then but the Amiga, because obviously its sound chip was made to play samples, it could sound amazing even during the actual game. I would argue it's better than the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo. I think it's the best 16-bit.
You think? Sound. Yeah, that's Paula, isn't it, in the Amiga, the PCM sound chip?
The Super Nintendo's close. There's a really good example is Pinball Dreams, which got a SNES port. The sound, it does the fairly decent recreation of the Amiga version sound, but the Amiga version, the music tracks that play when on the pinball tables, it's still better. The Super Nintendo was close, but it's I mean, a lot of, again, we're talking about American YouTubers rave about the sound in the Super Nintendo, but the Amiga was just better for audio.
I had a really interesting chat on a podcast I do recently with Format, who is quite a well-known composer in the Amiga demo scene.
Yeah.
And then went on to work for companies like Core on Chuck Rock and things like that.
Yeah.
And he was just talking about when the Amiga first came out, everyone started using samples, and you would get samples reused, and you would get those distinctive sounds like the sort of panpipe sounds that you would get in Shadow of the Beast and things like that.
Yeah.
But a lot of people like him were trying to work out ways to use the Amiga to recreate the chiptune style sounds of the Commodore 64 and get the flexibility of the way that the SID chip worked. So it's interesting that they were trying to almost go backwards to get the flexibility that they wanted, rather than just throw in lots and lots of samples in the style that you get at, say, the intro of Blood Money. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes, you're
just being hammered with samples of Harry Enfield and things like that.
I think if you play the Atari ST version, I think you get chip tune.
You do,
yeah, because obviously you can't do it. There are a few Amiga games that do that. I think Giannis Sisters as kind of a sort of C64-esque sort of warbly, synth sound.
Yeah,
the main music, and yeah, I mean that one seems to come to mind, and obviously the Cracktros.
Yes, yeah, of course, yeah, in as little space as possible. And after some time, people like Format and other composers did crack it. They did manage to find a way of doing these chip tunes in a really good way. So then that. You got the hybrid then of the samples and the chip tunes, and then the Amiga really sang, I think, once it got to that point. It was
exactly,
really
yeah.
Awesome, yeah.
Only had a couple more channels. That's the only thing. Also, you get a lot of games where, when you jump in a game, the jump sound effect cuts out a channel. But that was fairly common in those days. You got to play a NES game, really. And Mario 3, your console, you pretty much only hear half the music because, Mario's jumping all over the place and killing a channel.
Yeah, channels and stereo separation as well. When you get the drums in your left ear the whole time, it can be quite annoying.
Yeah, it starts to hurt, doesn't it? A little bit. I think it wasn't until really the PC Engine, I think they started. You had enough channels to kind of just happily play your music and still have, an explosion noise or a punch noise or something play without anything getting interrupted. But we're getting pretty high tech at that stage. We're talking like 87, 88. So we're getting spoiled with sound channels then. So we're going to put you on the spot now, though, because one question I have got for you is, what is your fave system? So console or computer? What would you say is your fave? You have to take one with you to a desert island. You have to abandon everything else. What would it be?
I think you know the answer to that already, don't you? That'll be the Amiga 500.
I thought you were going to say Atari ST.
Oh, a close second, yeah. But the reason being, you had the games, and you also had the other software. Like I used to spend a lot of time creating quite bad songs on things like Octamed and making 3D fly-throughs on Vista Pro.
Deluxe Paint, messing around on that.
Deluxe Paint, all of these things. So if I was on a desert island, that would keep me busy for hours. I might put in a request, though, is when I sold my Amiga, I had a second floppy disk drive on it. I had the 512K RAM expansion in the trapdoor, of course. and I had an A570 CD-ROM drive.
Check you out, Your Majesty.
Yeah, well,
pimped out Amiga.
I bought that when it was clear the CDTV was dead and they weren't releasing software for it anymore. It was in a bargain bin.
Oh, well, I think it was alive in our hearts.
It was.
Where it counts.
What I did get with it was all of those CDPD and Fred Fish CDs. And I would spend weeks and weeks and weeks just going through the thousands upon thousands of public domain software discs on these CDs. And they were discs. You did have to put a floppy disk in some of them.
Yeah.
And write it to a disk to be able to then play it. It didn't just
save stuff. Thing is, though, I mean, that drive would actually carry on to be fairly practical, wouldn't it? Because like Amiga format would start having CDs on the cover, and you could run that off that drive and all that, the OCS games.
It would, but I'd moved on to the PC by then.
Oh my god!
I had an A500. I didn't have an A500 Plus, so there was some compatibility problems because the CDTV I think had the what did it have?
The ECS,
didn't it?
Angus order,
enhanced chips. So there were certain things like SimCity that just wouldn't run. The TV version wouldn't run for me, but it was still cool. I'd put my Prodigy CD in or whatever I was listening to at the time and play some music,
Can't get more 90s than that.
Yeah, you have to put the CD in a caddy as well, which was fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'd take my A570 to my desert island with me and all of my PD CDs, please.
I do occasionally look, and my girlfriend wouldn't forgive me for this, but I do kind of look occasionally for a CDTV because it's just a cool looking device. It's absolutely massive. I think I'm not sure I'll be able to fit it in like a sort of a TV unit these days, but it's sort of bigger than your average. It's like a Laserdisc player almost.
Yeah, it's sort of built to be put into your stack system because we were hi-fi separates at the time, so you would put it in with your hi-fi separates, wouldn't you? Yeah, such a strange system.
It was like the controller it had.
Oh, the infrared controller.
Yeah.
The infrared, controller with a little keyboard on it. So that always looked really cool.
That's horrendous, though, isn't it? You can't play a game with that.
I think the delay on infrared would be horrible. Yeah. It looked cool, though. And I think you had to pay extra, didn't you, to get things like the disk drive, the external disk drive and the keyboard. Did it come with a keyboard? I can't remember.
I think certain packs did, didn't it? Like maybe you had to get like the Uber pack and you'd get all the gear chucked in there. Yeah,
it was something ridiculous like $699 to buy it when you could buy an Amiga 500 or even a 600 maybe for what were you paying then? $300, $399?
It was around that. I think it started off with just the base unit because they thought everybody would just use it as a VCR type thing. And then they realised, well, we need to kind of probably position this more as an Amiga because no bugger's buying it. So that's when they sort of popped in a keyboard and a mouse. I remember, again, Silica Systems, those wonderful shops that always advertise in Amiga format. I think they used to try and sell the bundle with the keyboard and the mouse in sort of the 93, 92 time. Yeah. And I guess that was Commodore had just a surplus of them, and they were like, how the hell can we get these sold? But I still think you probably would pick a 500 or a 1200 would have been out by, if you're talking 93. So, yeah.
The one addition it did have was a MIDI port. I don't know why they decided to do that, but they put a MIDI port on the back of it, which the 500 didn't have.
Oh, right. So you could plug a keyboard in, I guess, was what it was used for. Yeah. I don't think the Atari ST had that sewn up by that point, didn't it, really? I think.
Absolutely, yeah. That was the musician's machine, wasn't it? Yeah.
I mean, it was exaggerated, wasn't it? I mean, you could just get very basic adapters that let you do the same stuff on an Amiga. And I can't imagine there was much advantage from the ST generally. I mean,
I did a video to prove this point last year where me and a couple of other YouTubers all got our Amigas out, and I took games. So I plugged what is it, Yamaha Roland SC55.
Yeah.
Because the MT32 was the big one at the time, but I didn't have that. But you can put the SC55 in MT32 compatibility mode. And then there is a library of Amiga games that will output MIDI music. They're mostly Sierra point-and-click games.
Oh, right, yeah.
And they sound pretty cool. And then another YouTuber made a song in Octamed, which has MIDI support. And another one used Music X. So we all sort of took these different parts and showed what you could do with the Amiga. I think the argument the Atari guys always had was that the timing was perfect on the Atari, and it was slightly out, or some, I don't know the exact reason, but there was something about the timing on the Atari that made it better. But I think that might just be technical snobbery. I think you could get away with everything you need to on the Amiga, really.
There was actually an interesting fact about the ST is there was a game, I think Ubisoft made a game for the ST that came with a cartridge that plugged into the cartridge port. Also, the actual game was on a disc.
And it actually MIDI Maze, is it?
It was actually it was a Ubisoft game that had enhanced music.
Okay.
So you pop this cartridge in, and it basically I can't remember the name of the game. This is terrible, but it was a game. You pop the cartridge in with the game, which is just loaded off disk as per normal. But you would get like the music would be as good as the Amiga. There was the Amiga version of this game as well, but the music was identical like throughout the game because this cartridge was basically like a music card. Plugged into the cartridge port. It was only used for this one game though. It came with the game. I think it was also partly copy protection for the game as well.
Yeah.
Because the ST had a cartridge port. The Amiga never had anything like this, but it had a cartridge port that I think the intention was to make games for the cartridge port. But I think there was a handful of games came out on cartridge. But yeah, Ubisoft used it for a music enhancer thing that one game used, and it sounded amazing.
It's another hard lesson that companies had to learn in the early 90s, wasn't it? Which is, if the hardware isn't standard, it ain't going to get used. The software developers want to appeal to the people who can actually play your software. And there were a lot of companies learned a lot of hard lessons, like
Sega.
Sega's the first one that comes to mind, isn't it?
King of the add-ons, yeah.
The 32X and whatnot. So
I always say the Mega CD was perfectly okay. If they just did the Mega CD and nothing else, they wouldn't have had the issues maybe they still would have, but there was no need for a 32X.
I've got a system incoming which builds on the Mega CD. It's called a Laser Active, and it's a Laserdisc player.
Yes.
With modules that you can slot in. So you can slot in a Mega Drive module or a PC Engine module and play those games. But there's also a small library, I think, of 20 or so Mega Drive Laserdisc games.
Mega LD.
Yeah, so I've got one of those incoming as well.
Where the hell did you get that?
That was from a Japanese auction site.
Yahoo?
Can't remember the name of it. I'll ping across the name of it to you later, and we'll put it in the comments to the show so people can see.
Yeah, awesome.
And that's the same site where Gary got his Sharp 68000s from. And I said that plural because he has got.
Oh my god!
I think he's got 8 now.
8 of them.
He is the hoarder of 68,000. Like Kim Justice did a video recently where she managed to get a battered 6800 with things missing from it, and she was just trying to get everything working on it and everything. And this guy's got 8. Just,
no, I think Kim picked hers up for something like 35 quid on a Facebook group, didn't she?
Yeah,
that's a great pickup. Even if you only used that as a case, it would be a great pickup. But now part of the reason Gary's been buying these, some of them are broken, some of them were supposed to be broken but surprisingly work. He's going to bring them all to the cave here, and we're going to go through them, see how many working ones we can get, and also if we can, try and get some spare parts over to Kim to help her get her system going. So there is some logic behind the madness.
I mean, how much does a working one sell for now? If I wanted to buy one,
this is the thing with the Japanese auction site. You can pay £900 for one. You can get lucky one day and pay 150 quid for one. There's a lot of luck in these auction sites. It's well worth trying. Certainly, you're more likely to get a bargain there than you are on eBay.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give that a miss. What I'm aiming for next is a green original Xbox, which is more reasonable £100 mark. So that's my next pickup.
What you also have to consider is the shipping.
The
tax as well as it comes in. So there's a lot of hidden costs to think about as well.
Yeah, and then obviously, God, even if you pay all that, it might, if someone at the Royal Mail throws it onto the van and it's not packed so well, then God knows what could happen to it.
Exactly, yeah.
And then the games on top of that, I don't think they're too cheap either, are they? They come in beautiful, big, like sort of large, almost like Neo Geo type sort of cases, like VHS tape type cases, I think, from what I've seen.
Yeah, they're these beautiful big, like you say, like the Neo Geo cases, and you open it up expecting to find this great big cartridge in there, but you find a whole bunch of 5 1/4-inch floppies in there.
Yeah, and then they're not like they're sort of, they're not, when I think of floppy as sort of 5.5-inch floppies, I think of like really low capacity Commodore 64 sort of 170K doofers, but these are like sort of 1.2 meg or something, like a yeah. So Street Fighter 2, you know, comes on 5.5-inch floppies, but it's not on like 15 of them. It's just on like a couple or something, isn't it? Or, yeah,
it is. Yeah. But you know, we put them all on the SD card now, so they're nice to look at. And actually, we did pull a few discs out and use them just because the eject mechanism on the Sharp so nice. It's got this soft eject, so you can type in a command or press the button on the front, and it just delicately spits out the 5 1/4-inch floppy disk, which is really nice, really slick finish to it.
The same thing with the my Apple II GS has got a 3.5-inch floppy drive, and that is a nice eject on that.
Oh, of course, yeah. You've got soft eject. You can drag it to the trash can, can't you?
That's right. Yeah, I just set up the 2GS to eject a disc. Don't play a game on it. Just take a bit of time to set it up and then eject a disc, and just get that adrenaline rush that we all get when we get a soft eject. Nothing can recreate that these days with it. So our digital downloads and all of that stuff, a rubbishy old tray popping out. Slot loading drives. It's just kids. They don't know what they're missing, do they? With
their lack of soft eject. Yeah.
So, what would you say? Kind of the development of the previous question would be. What would be your fave video game era or computing era?
I think I would probably say this, not from a technical point of view, but just from the fact that I had so much time to dedicate to games, and that was the early 90s. Yeah. And that would be the tail end of my Amiga 500 ownership and the start of my IBM PC ownership. So I had all those great Amiga games. The platform had matured, and you had, the best games coming out for the Amiga. And then I moved over to a 486 PC and was able to experience things like Need for Speed and then Duke Nukem and all of those games that, yes, you could probably run some of them on a highly accelerated Amiga, but we were just on the next generation now, really.
Exactly.
And then there was also, I used to play a lot of Ultima. I don't know if you were ever into the Ultima series, Richard Garrett's Ultima series.
Played the NES version, weirdly enough. I think there's actually a NES one. I think it's Ultima 4, I think might have been on the NES. But
yeah, there's even Ultima 7 on the SNES, which is a weird one. Yeah. But yes, Ultima it goes all the way back to the Apple II, but it was Ultima 7 on the PC that really blew me away. They took the graphics up a notch to a level that the Amiga wasn't capable of, and then just the whole size of the world. It was, I guess, sandbox-like in the fact that you could do anything and go anywhere. Every book on a bookcase was readable. If you really wanted to, you could hack someone up, put them in a backpack, put them on a bookshelf, leave them there. You could do anything you want. It was this huge sandbox world. And I think I really enjoyed the development of that on the Amiga, because we're talking about the end of the Amiga as well as the PC. So things like 3D Construction Kit. I know technically it's not a game, but it was this lovely sandbox that you could use. I don't know if you ever used Omark's.
I think was it Castle Master and some of the other is it those games that use those 3D. I think that the 3D Construction Kit was development of that, wasn't it?
Trying to remember the name of the engine now. You had Total Eclipse, Castle Master. You had all of the Driller. Freescape, wasn't it?
Freescape, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
3D Construction Kit. And other sandbox type games in that era. You had Hunter, the Amiga, which was like the GTA of its time, with bicycles and
of course,
and what could you do? You had bicycles, jeeps.
Yeah, you had a little boat you could jump in.
You could go windsurfing, couldn't you?
Yeah. There's also buildings you could go into and like pick up things off desks and stuff, and
and all those games.
Damocles was a similar sort of game to that.
And I was gutted when I moved to the PC. There was supposed to be a PC version of Damocles made, or it might have been Mercenary 3. One of them was supposed to be ported, and it was even previewed in PC format, but it never came out. We just with the screenshots. Yeah.
A really weird one of those sort of early 3D sort of sandbox games is Terminator. The original Terminator film as a PC game made by Bethesda, funnily enough. I don't mean like the later 90s ones like Skynet and all those ones. There was a game around 91 or 2, and you literally play as, I think you play as the Terminator itself. And you're in like a sandbox 3D vector version of Los Angeles, and you've got to go and like kill Sarah Connor, and you've got to find her and kill her.
I've never heard of that.
Check it out. Cool. Check it out. It's Bethesda made it. It's literally the Terminator based on the first Terminator film. And yeah, it's a sandbox game. Didn't get ported to anything else. You got to get DOSBox going to be able to play it. But yeah, also they had the franchise for a few years, and they made several Terminator games. Future Shock, I think, is the one that everyone thinks of. Yeah. But yeah, it's a really unique game that doesn't really get talked about. But check it out. If you look up Bethesda the Terminator, you'll be able to look it up. But yeah, really advanced game for its time, and a unique thing that you actually play. You can play as the actual Terminator itself and kill Sarah Connor, which is like, goes against your every instinct of what a game should be. That's like that.
Sounds a bit like RoboCop 3 on the Amiga. That had those 3D elements, less sandboxy. You did certainly have to go from A to B on that. But it was an interesting twist that they put on that game, wasn't it?
You had like corridor shooters and
the driving segment.
Yeah, exactly. And it was well, actually, I'm just looking up the Wikipedia for that Terminator game. So it turns out you can either play as Carl Reese and protect Sarah Connor, or you can be the Terminator. So you can pick either. But you can run around in the sandbox area. You can steal cars, shoot anybody, break into buildings and steal supplies. Yeah. It's like Damocles, where you've got a very narrow sort of view of the 3D area, just because it's not, so it's an old 3D game. You can have a full screen thing with your sort of status displays around it. But yeah, came out in 1990. So yeah, although the Amiga probably couldn't run it very well, the PC was already at that stage when it came to 3D stuff. A bit better for that sort of thing. But yeah.
So that sort of early 90s era. Stunt Island as well. That was a great game on the PC. I don't know if you ever used Stunt Island. You basically built film sets and carried out stunts.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that was kind of... Was it like Stunt Car Racer was made by those guys? Or
who made Stunt Island was... I can't remember who programmed it. It was obviously... had the Disney logos all over it. It was a Disney software title. It had 4D Sports Driving. That was a good one with the kit that you could make your own tracks with.
God, yeah, there was like 4D tennis and all kinds of like franchise. Like a lot of them translated worse than others. But it was such an exciting time because, especially with the Amiga, you didn't really get those sort of games on consoles.
That's it. When you compare games that were on consoles with the Amiga, often the Amiga does come up lacking. A lot of them are made first and foremost for the consoles. And then we would either get no port or we would get a slightly dodgy port. Yeah. Amiga games in their own right really did, they could stand head and shoulders above some of those console games. Yeah.
Although bizarrely, you did get some of the EA flight sims on the Mega Drive. You got like LHX Attack Copter and Attack Chopper and things like that, because obviously, that had a 68K in it. And I mean, it's funny because the Super Nintendo needs all kinds of accelerators to be able to do any kind of polygon. Although I played Steel Talons on the Super Nintendo, which doesn't use any kind of enhancement chip, and it actually uses polygons, but the frame rate is crap. It's like maybe 2 frames a second. But the Mega Drive could do that stuff without any chips. So some of the flight sims aren't too bad. You've got like F-29 Retaliator. There was a whole slate of EA flight sims.
Didn't they always feel the need when they put it on a console to put a thumping soundtrack over it? They always had to have. It's like they fitted a car radio in your aeroplane whenever they put a flight sim on a console.
They did that with a lot of ports from a computer. Like bloody Sensible Soccer has like some weird rock music playing during the game.
What is it? They think console owners have a short attention span. What is it? Why do they have to have thumping music? They always did it. Yeah.
I mean, if they ported Deluxe Paint to the Mega Drive, would you have some kind of rock song going on in the background while you were like drawing some stuff?
I'm trying to think now back to Mario Paint. Did that? I think that had music playing.
It did, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, you got some. I was going to say SimCity 2000 on the Super Nintendo, but that did actually have music anyway.
Yeah.
Sort of funny little, mini bits of music. But anyway, guys, I think we've got over an hour again. Stu, we're getting bad at this timekeeping thing.
We're awful at it. Yeah.
We do a big alarm go off, don't we? At some point, we hit that hour point. We have loved ones to go back to. Well, you've got your man cave, so I don't know what your hours in the man cave are. I'm sure you see your missus occasionally when you put the Amiga joystick down. So thanks, Neil, for coming on the show today. We really, really appreciate it. We absolutely adore your channel. We're really looking forward to some of the your future episodes, and God knows what you're going to uncover on eBay that's going to make us all immensely jealous. But we're going to love watching you talk to us about it. But where can we find you? You've got a YouTube channel. Where else are you on the interwebs? You can find me on Twitter at The Retro Man Cave. You can find me on YouTube, obviously. Facebook, look for Retro Man Cave page. I think those are my main outlets. Yeah, you can find me in those places. Are you not on Instagram as well? I am. Yes, well done. I'm a big fan of Instagram. I'm The Retro Man Cave on Instagram and The Retro Man Cave on Twitch as well. And the next live stream will be at the end of this month. And it's going to be more Amiga goodness. It's going to be Amiga at the movies. So we're going to be playing things like Robocop and Terminator. And we're going to be joined by Oliver Harper, who's a YouTuber. He's been on our show. Oh, he's been on your show. Yeah, great guy. Yeah, so he's going to provide the movie knowledge while we play the games and see what the Amiga has to offer, good, bad, and indifferent on movie ports. So hopefully you'll join us there and certainly will. Say hello, yeah. And hunt down that weird Bethesda 1990 Terminator game. That would be a great stream for yourself that no one would probably be aware of. So definitely, yeah, I'm going to check that out now. It's cool. Stu, where can you find us on the internet? You can find us on iTunes under Console Shock. We're on Stitcher as well. We've got a website, consoleshock.net, and you can find us on YouTube. Just search Console Shock, and again on Facebook. And we don't actually have an Instagram. Maybe we should sort out one. You're the fan, apparently. So. Well, I know. I just follow busty women on it and the Retro Man Cave. Go hand in hand, don't they? Yeah, well, that's really all it's for, I assume. If I post the cover of Barbarian with Maria Whittaker, you'll be happy then. There you go, yeah. Absolutely perfect. Both favourite things. Okay, everybody, thank you for listening, and we shall see you in the next one. Take care. See ya. Thanks, guys. It's been